All right, let's journey back to 19th century West Africa. It was a time of huge conflict and incredible change. Today, we're going to dig into how a seriously powerful warrior state, one born from the ashes of an older empire, was eventually brought under the control of the British Empire.
So our story really kicks off right here, in Yorubaland at the beginning of the 19th century. The great Oyo Empire, which had kept the peace for ages, had just crumbled. And what that left behind was a total power vacuum, a really chaotic landscape where all these rival city-states were suddenly scrambling to take over and claim supremacy.
But here's the thing about Ibadan. It wasn't some ancient kingdom with a long royal line. Nope, it was something totally new. It actually started as a war camp around 1829, and it became this magnet for the toughest, most ambitious warriors from all over the region. This was a state built on one thing and one thing only: pure military merit.
So, what was Ibadan's secret sauce? What exactly made them such a powerhouse? To really get how they fell, we first have to understand what made them so strong before the British really showed up on the scene.
You have to understand, Ibadan's whole society, its entire political structure, was basically a machine built for one thing: war and expansion. You didn't inherit power, you earned it on the battlefield. It was run by a military aristocracy, where the chiefs climbed the ranks based on how successful they were in battle. This meant the state was always ready for a fight, because fighting was how it survived, how it grew, and how it thrived.
And this quote right here, it just nails it. For Ibadan, war wasn't just, politics by other means. It was the economy. All the wealth came pouring in from tribute they demanded, from places they conquered, from raiding, and from controlling the all-important trade routes, all of it guaranteed by their army. It worked incredibly well for them, but, it also made them a permanent threat to all of their neighbors.
Well, as you can probably guess, when you have a superpower like Ibadan just running the show, it's not going to sit well with everybody. By 1877, a whole coalition of rival states got together and formed an alliance called the Ekiti-Parapo. Their one goal? To break free from Ibadan's control. And this kicked off the longest, most brutal civil war in the history of the Yoruba people.
And get this, the war even got its name from the sound of the new technology that changed everything. The name Kiriji is supposed to sound like the thunderous roar of the heavy cannons the Ekiti-Parapo forces got their hands on. That sound, Kiriji, was literally the sound of a whole new kind of warfare, one that would challenge Ibadan like never before.
So this is where the real drama of the war comes into play. On one side, you've got Ibadan with its huge, massive, battle-hardened army all under one command. But on the other side, the Ekiti-Parapo, with help from merchants down in Lagos, had the tech. They had modern rifles and those Kiriji cannons. It was this total mismatch that led to a brutal, bloody 16 years stalemate. So, after 16 years of this brutal war, pretty much everyone is just exhausted. The economy's in shambles, the trade routes are blocked. And who do you think is watching all this unfold from the sidelines? Yep, an outside power, sitting in its coastal colony in Lagos, saw a perfect opportunity to make a move.
And that really makes you stop and think, right? While all the Yoruba states were desperate for the fighting to stop, who really stood to benefit the most from a stable, controlled peace?
For the British sitting down in Lagos, this whole war was just a massive headache. It was terrible for business. It was stopping the flow of valuable stuff like palm oil from the interior to the coast. So peace, especially a peace that they brokered and they enforced, wouldn't just get trade moving again, it would also block their French rivals and, just happen to be the perfect excuse to expand their own political power.
So they step in. In 1886, British officials, with a little push from missionaries, mediate this peace treaty. And on the surface, it looks like a huge diplomatic win. But really, this treaty was the first brick, the cornerstone as historians call it, that the British would use to build their control over the entire region.
But that first little foothold of diplomacy, it wasn't going to stay that way for long. Things were about to shift from friendly mediation to straight-up colonial conquest, and it was going to change everything for Ibadan.
And if you want to know exactly how the British attitude changed, you just have to look at this one quote from Governor Carter of Lagos. He said a Maxim gun offered a more convincing weight of argument than any treaty. He's not talking about words anymore. He's talking about the Maxim gun, that brand new terrifying machine gun that gave European armies a massive, massive advantage.
And once they decided to move, man, it happened fast. It all went down in 1893. In March, the Ibadan chiefs say no thanks to a treaty that would put a British official in their city. So what do the British do? They make an example out of the neighboring Ajele kingdom, crushing them with military force. The message could not have been clearer. By August, the Ibadan chiefs realized it was useless to refuse, and they signed the agreement. And by December, it was a done deal. Captain Bower was installed as the first British resident, and just like that, Ibadan's independence was over.
So, the British did bring peace, but they also brought something else, a total revolution. They didn't just take over, they systematically took apart Ibadan's war-based society and completely rebuilt it in their own image.
What they did was basically a complete economic rewiring of Ibadan. The old system, based on military strength, on tribute, on plunder, gone. In its place, the British built a new colonial economy, designed for one thing, producing cash crops like cocoa and palm oil to ship back to Europe. The whole economic engine was no longer about building up a Yoruba empire, it was now about feeding the British one.
And this wasn't an accident, it was a very deliberate playbook. They built railways, not to connect the Yoruba people, but to get raw materials to the ports. They replaced the old currency with their own. And here's the kicker. They brought in new taxes that you could only pay in British money. So what does that do? It forces farmers to start growing cash crops for export, whether they want to or not, just so they can pay their taxes. And just like that, the warrior becomes a farmer for the empire.
So that's where we're left. Yes, the British ended these really destructive, long-running wars. They established what's called the Pax Britannica, a British peace, but that peace came at a huge cost. The total loss of sovereignty, of economic independence, and of a whole way of life. And it leaves us with this big, critical question that people still argue about today. Was the peace actually worth the price?